Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Respecting the Beer. My name is Gary Arndt, and with me again, as usual, are the doctors of beer, Bobby Fleshman and Allison McCoy. And today, we're talking about something that I gotta confess I know very little about. Decoction. And I like to consider myself a reasonably educated man, well-traveled. And in the course of my travels, I must say I have never come across decoction. And in preparation for this, which consists of about 10 seconds of a Google search, I came up with a definition which said, the act or process of boiling anything in a watery fluid to extract its virtues, which sounds to me, one, like a process for cooking, and two, a way of trying witches. So why don't you give a definition of decoction and why it's so important to the process of brewing?
First, before you answer, can I just say how I just want to sit in this moment that there's something that Gary doesn't know because he's like the walking Wikipedia. He knows there's never been a conversation I've had with Gary that he doesn't have at least some experience or traveled to the place of the origin of the thing that has happened. Anyway, I just love this moment that I might know a little bit more about decoction than he does.
So this is what it's like to be Gary the other 99.99% of the time.
What power you have. Oh my gosh. Okay,
So,
decoction.
You're a professor of chemistry. We could have a lot of
that's
discussions
true. Fair.
about stuff that I probably don't know about.
Touché.
So we
But
start
interesting stuff. There we go.
a lot of conversations about how things got to be the way they are in beer. And we make traditional English beers, and we've talked a little bit about lagers, I think, at some point on this podcast. We've talked about IPAs and the evolution. But decoction brewing would have been one of those things, one of those ways of making beer from the beginning, because of right off the bat, no one had stainless or even copper vessels to brew with if you go back far enough.
I say, when are we? Are we in like Mesopotamia?
We're talking
are
500
we in like
to 1,000 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Medieval?
Yeah.
Eastern Europe?
So what you would do, we're making beer at these times, and the way you're doing it is in wood vessels. Well, how the hell do you direct fire a wood vessel?
Carefully.
So we're getting off in the weeds, but it's worth mentioning there's a style of beer called Stein beer these days where people take stones, put them over a fire, and then they will throw the stones into the thing they're trying to boil. That was how they boiled back in those days.
I just had an image of like the stone massage things where you have this like the hot stones placed on your back, and like you pay money for that.
Less fun, I think. People really got hurt doing this process.
If you have the wrong kind of stone, it can blow up.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's fair.
Extremely dangerous. So what they would have isolated those stones that were most reliable at some point, but you can only find out if they're reliable by using them. So people still do this as a novelty release once in a while. In fact, Lakefront Brewing Company, their flagship arguably is their Stein beer, which is called, do you recall?
Don't look at me.
River West Stein.
That one,
yeah.
Yes.
So the reason I go off on that a little bit is because you can pull a piece of that liquid out of that container, you can boil that, and then bring it back over, thereby adjusting, depending on the proportions of volumes. You're able to adjust that volume without even owning a thermometer. So we're getting to this point in time where we're able to take volumes of liquid, and we can see when something's boiling, whether we know that number, and we can throw it back into where we started and end up somewhere.
Pause you for a second because we actually haven't defined decoction.
We haven't.
So just let me try. Yeah. Okay, so imagine you're making you have a pot of oatmeal. And so what you do, you have a big pot of oatmeal and a little pot on the side on the stove, and you scoop out a cup of the big pot oatmeal and you put it in the little cup or in the little pot. And then you boil at a higher temperature or cook that oatmeal to where you just cooked it a little too much, and then you put it back into the big vat of oatmeal. And so what happens then is you've got now two different varieties of oatmeal all mixed together that have cooked at different temperatures. Is that good?
Yeah.
Enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so now go back to your rock story.
Well, I mean, that's pretty much it. By the way, I don't think Lakefront does any of what that Stein beer story suggests, although there may be some element of truth to it.
But talking about how you can control temperature that way. So you can it's hard to control a big pot at a rapid boil or at a certain temperature, but it's easier to control a small amount.
Let's back up a little bit, because the whole point of taking a grain, or the whole purpose, the methodology of taking the grain from the field and extracting its what we call extract to make the beer, that whole technology has come about through trial and error over time. you have to go through various temperature steps. You blend your grain with water. You got to go through different temperature steps at different pHs for different lengths of time. And you don't own a thermometer if you live 1,000 years ago. And so that's why I go back to this. What you did know is that if you started to do this piecewise, where you take a piece out of your mash, where it's the blend of your liquid and your grain, you boil that, and you bring it back over, and you do all these things by the volumetric game, because they had ways of measuring volume for thousands and thousands of years. And that's really all you need. And then two sets, you have to be able to see that something's boiling. That's really the only tools you need in terms of the instrumentation. So they were able to hit temperatures whether they knew what they were, just by recording the volumes and boiling pieces and bringing them back.
Now, from the chemistry side, unless you hit the right temperature in the mash, you're not going to be accessing the different types of enzymatic processes.
Yeah.
And so you had to be able to get at least a certain temperature. It's kind of the same thing that, you can't, cook something until you get over a certain.
Yeah, I'm trying not to use any of that terminology. I'm trying to speak about it as if I live in those times, because they're not knowing anything about
and
the
start
chemistry.
Sounding like Chaucer.
Right, yeah. Let's go back to the old English.
So you have a cubit of beer.
Hogsheads and yeah. So that was a good episode. Here we go. So what's the point? We got to figure out how to activate
why do we
these
decoct
enzymes before we even know they exist. So at that time.
And we should add, we don't decoct everything.
We don't here, but we decoct more than most breweries.
And most breweries don't decoct for a very good reason.
Most breweries these days don't have the ability to do decoct if they wanted to. We have equipment
or the desire
that is built in the Czech Republic, where in fact decoction is a synonym for brewing. They don't have a word for decoction because it's so synonymous. There's no reason to create a word.
Maybe that's why you don't know the word.
Yeah,
Gary.
I was thinking,
because
yeah. So yeah, they don't understand how you don't.
Well, that was actually going to be my question.
Yeah.
I mean, you're just talking about boiling, which I assumed was like a normal process in brewing.
Well, and I'm going to pan out and kind of give the 101 of how beer is made to make sure we're on the same page. So you blend water with grain, you hold that grain at a certain temperature. The enzymes do the job of breaking the starches down and releasing the sugars into the liquid. That liquid, which we call wort, is ran off into a kettle. And at that point, you do the boiling, and you do that boiling to stabilize that beer. So if there's any bacteria or yeast, it's all killed off. And then it also allows you to make your hops bitter, isomerize those hops. And
chemical reactions for the hops to do their thing.
We like hops when they're bitter. They balance the sweetness of beer. Where wine has acidity, beer doesn't have that to balance the sweetness. So you have to find something. And in the case of beer, it's hops. There's other things that does in the boil for you, but generate color and flavor and so on. So that's the boiling part we do today. We don't boil the grain today. We back in those times did boil the grain for the reasons we just went over.
So wait, the mashing, which is the first part, and then the boiling is the second part. So it used to be just one part?
So we mash, and part of that mash gets boiled, and that part of the mash gets boiled is the decoction.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm learning.
And then that piece gets recombined back with the grain that you started with, and now you've raised it up to the next temperature that you need it to be at. And then you take a piece and do that again.
So we can boil in our mash cooker. That's what makes us so special.
Yeah, our mash cooker is our kettle. The way it's set up, you actually start in the kettle, you blend the mash, and then you send that over to what we call the lauter tun, the separation tank. And then we can pull off of that lauter tun back into the kettle and boil it and send it back over. So we're hitting temperatures. We know our temperatures because we have thermometers, right? But back then they wouldn't, and they were able to repeat. This is why the Germans are so fastidious in their brewing, because they learned to make these beers before the technology existed to measure these temperatures. So they had to be very, very strict about the times and the volumes and the methods. And they still hold to that philosophy in Germany.
So we've almost lost brewers because you have requested that they decoct things. So let's just jump straight into
Do we want to talk about what's happening in decoction, or we talk about the drama?
Well, I was going to jump into the drama, but maybe we should talk about what happens. And Gary, lead us. Should we talk about what happens?
I just want to go back to clarify this, because I think some people might be confused. So you're taking part of the grain
in water mixture,
boiling it.
Mm-hmm.
From that, as my definition said, you're taking out the virtues.
Yeah.
Taking those virtues, putting it back into the mash. And so, like, what are these?
That's a great segue, because I was going to say it's more than just temperature, right? It may have been a functional reason that people did this in the old times, but it also it goes through a series of chemical reactions that when you take the amount of protein that's involved when you have all the grain present and the sugars that are being released by these enzymes throughout the process, when you put all of those together in an aqueous, a water environment, and add that kind of heat, like 90 C plus, which is like 190 F plus, when you do that, you go through what are called Maillard reactions.
The Maillard
reaction. And don't ask me to define it. There are thousands and thousands of pathways, but just take for granted that the combination of amino acids, which are in proteins, and sugars
and heat
and heat and water, all these things have to be present so you can drive these reactions that we all associate with cooked food.
Mm-hmm.
This is what really could be a definition of modern society or the modern world.
I like to use the definition. Yeah. So it's the Maillard reaction is that moment. So you have a piece of bread and you put it in the toaster oven and you haven't toasted long enough, and you only know that by tasting it because you're like, yep, it's not toast yet. There's a taste that goes along with once the bread becomes toast. And like bacon too.
And so
there's a moment bacon becomes bacon, and that's the Maillard reaction.
Exactly. Yeah, we've talked about bacon before. There's so much going on with bacon.
Maillard.
But you have the perfect environment to create these melanoidins. They're called melanoidins that are generated by these
fancy
Maillard
chemical
reactions.
result of the Maillard reaction.
Yeah.
Moving aside from the chemistry of it,
mm-hmm.
What is a concrete example of a beer where you're doing this? And what are you putting into it?
I've mentioned a lot about the Germans here and the Czechs. So this is really, you can write a tome on this subject. There are books, and they're over the eons, but I'll pick an example. Bock beer. Bock beer is an amber lager that Germans are known for making. Various strengths of amber or of Bock beer out there, various hoppiness and so forth for every season. But it's been seen as to beer what IPA is on the hoppy side, like American IPA. It's the malty side of beer, whereas a West Coast IPA is the hoppy other end of that spectrum. It's extremely malty, and malty is this nebulous word that we throw around. But when you're talking about decoction, those reactions that we were talking about, they make for an extreme bready expression. You'll see it show up in Bock's, Doppelbock's, Maibach's,
and it's a way to really
Eisbock.
fine tune some of that malty character.
Yeah,
to really give it more complexity.
Yeah,
and help
layered.
Separate out. Yeah, a layered.
It's
complexity.
Very layered. If I were talking with a brewer right now, I would say you can actually control your final gravity. So that is how much sugar is left in your final product. You have much more control of that by fine tuning how you decoct the beer. There's another functional reason that I have been both. I thought it was true on paper, and then I was convinced myself it was true in practice. These beers stay clearer longer because they're actually driving out proteins that would otherwise come out of solution and give rise to haze in your beer. They're actually, during the decoction process, these proteins are joining up with the tannins on the hull of the barley. So you're seeing that drop out in your boil kettle. It never makes its way into the fermenter and never makes its way into your beer. So there's just some functional reasons why we should all be thinking about decoction even in the 21st century.
And our beer, now we did a beer where we did and didn't decoct, and then we did a side-by-side.
Oh yeah, we've done that several times. I think every year I have to convince myself incled and everybody that works here that it's still worth it. And I should say something about...
Who do we decoct?
All of our Bocks, all our flagship Helles Lager, Pirates Cove.
Is Hildy?
And Hildy, yes, Hildy gets decocted because
we're both learning something.
I know.
She's a Czech beer. Now, in the past, I've been convinced not to do it, but like I said, I have some very patient brewers, and I push them to the limit on their tolerance. What I will throw at them. We are.
Well, of course, triple debacle.
Triple debacle is our Doppelbock that takes. One round of that takes...
Not just one decoction, not just two.
Well, it's 6, actually, because we
What?
do 2 batches in one tank. So there's 6 decoctions going into a single tank.
Brewers right now are just laughing their asses off
So it
at
takes
you.
us from... I'll start that brew at like 4 in, and I'll finish just with the mashing part, like all the we've been describing, just to get the mash part done before we extract the liquid and boil it. That will take 8 hours. whereas normally you can wrap an entire beer up in 8 hours. So that kind of gives you a
That's why it's
sense.
called triple debacle, because
Well,
it's a triple decoction.
Yeah, there's a longer story about each one of those. But another one that is you mentioned the Pilsner, and I wanted to say something about the Czechs when it comes to decoctions. So the German philosophy is how it generates all these colors and flavors, and it clearly does that. But in the Czech Republic, they are so focused on drinkability and they also have some of the best hops in the world. They like to use plenty of those hops and thereby expressing them in their beer. But then you need something to back that up on the breadiness, on the sweet side. And it's not so much as you'll find in Munich where they'll take a darker malt and then boil and get these flavors. They're trying to get everything out of their Pilsner malt. So they'll take just a very light kilned malt. And just from that alone, they're able to do their own version of decoction in an effort to just elevate that lighter tone on that spectrum, the breadiness. What makes a fantastic Czech Pilsner is that they're both extremely bready and full-bodied and extremely hoppy. And if you go to Germany, you'll see that both of those variables go down because they're looking for something more akin to what we would associate with a light lager here.
Mm-hmm.
That said, they're very bitter in Germany because there's not much in the way of breadiness to back that bitterness up. And then there's water profile considerations. But anyway, you get the idea. There's a knob that these guys can use, these different countries.
You know the other knob you can use in making that perfect Czech Pilsner? The Luker faucet.
Yeah, the Czechs are not messing around. They don't like to waste time. The Czech valve, which we have in 1 year now.
We have two.
Two of them.
Yeah. So now I want to go back to what you mentioned and what Allison was bringing up before. Most people do not, or most brewers do not use decoction. And
That's
you
right.
said you had a problem with brewers who came. So it seems like, especially if you're talking about doing this 6 times, like if this was gymnastics, you'd have a high degree of difficulty on your score. Where
Right.
you're possibly doing something you don't need to do.
Right.
Like there would be a cheat way out of this that you're kind of avoiding.
Good.
So why
Yeah.
do you do it and why doesn't everyone else do it? And why do brewers have such a difficult time with this?
Well, like I said, we continue to test whether we don't and do it. And side
Brewers
by
are
side,
pissed.
they do
Some
win.
of them are pissed
But
when you can definitely
This
tell
is
a
all
difference.
tongue in cheek, right? Once they see it makes for a better beer, a brewer is all in. A brewer will stay here for 48 hours if it makes a better beer. That's what, at least our brewers, that's what we think around here.
And
But
we
we
do
don't
pay them for this.
We don't want to do it for no reason. It's just not to throw it on the label. So what are the cheats, you asked? In modern times, now I always want to give credit to the people that make our raw ingredients, the maltsters. They also are playing in that sandbox. They're taking grain after it's been dried and they're cooking it. So they're doing the same chemistry upstream that we're doing downstream. We really are continuing the malting process in some regard. When we get it, we just rehydrate and start it up again. So they're doing this and they're locking in the flavors that we're doing. The difference is it's been aged. I didn't get it directly from them. So it's now not as fresh. So you're looking for that fresh factor. As to, is it entirely? I said it's not quite exactly the same. The chemistry that's going on with a green barley as it's going through the whole process, it's a very different, it's subtly different than what we do with a dried malt as it comes into the brewery. But I think fresh is the key difference in terms of flavor. You're getting more of that just open the oven aromatics from the beer once it's made, and we're locking that in. But then I go back again to these functional reasons why we do it. And we can actually, believe it or not, it doesn't matter to us, but we can get 2% more extract out of our grain by doing decoction.
When I was looking,
If you're a big brewer, 2% of your ingredient costs can really add up.
Yeah, about the efficiencies that decoction allows.
Mhm.
But so the 36-hour brew,
It's
which
really
is
beating it up in decoction. We kind of glossed over that. You're beating the hell out of this grain, right? Boiling it back and forth. It's going to release. I did gloss over that. This is a lot of the reason why they did it as well, because the grain they had not been properly malted by modern technology standards.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's worth me interrupting and making that point clear that decoction had a very functional purpose beyond the fact they didn't have thermometers. They're trying to take a grain that's otherwise housing inaccessible sugars, and they're beating the crap out of it to get there.
I like how you have to justify interrupting me, and when I never justify interrupting you. So we have had not necessarily an uprising of brewers saying this is ridiculous, I don't want to decoct. But it is time consuming. I mean, it does add.
It costs money on that side and energy. Yeah.
It costs money, it costs energy. It costs them paying attention. Not that they don't pay attention all the time, but the amount of mental energy that goes into the decoction as well. If we do this on the majority of our beers, that's asking our brewers
the funny thing about decoction is it does take a lot of thinking, but it takes thinking like playing chess takes thinking. You're not,
which is an extreme amount of thinking.
But I mean, it's not a high speed process.
True.
A lot of our 547 gives me so much stress. 547.
I can't tell when you've had a 547 day. Well, in both ways.
Yeah, everybody has a 547 story. But 547, it's just an onslaught of.
For those that don't know, 547 is our
West Coast double,
8.5% IPA, double IPA.
And when we get time to hop that and all these steps, and by the way, it's the biggest thing that we put through our system. It is the most mash, the most grain, the most hops.
Thank God we don't. Wait, we don't decoct it, do we?
No, but you know what's crazy? Yeah,
Bobby?
I know. Yeah,
no.
I know. I do.
No, sir.
I want to have.
This is my mom voice now.
Robert.
No.
I want to have some people left on payroll here. I want people to stick around. No, it's
cooler would be like, I'm quitting.
Here's what you do. One time,
no.
do it, and then see if Joel can taste it.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
I might get the guys on board with that prank.
No. But okay, let's assume.
So I was going to say, though, decocting...
Would that extra Maillard help the 547?
Again, there's more than flavor. There's functional reasons. And there might even be flavor impacts that go beyond what we were talking about when we say breadiness.
Yeah.
To have the whole ensemble of reactions in front of me, I wouldn't be able to read it anyway. But
you need a chemist to do that.
You need a food chemist. You need people that are really, really deep into this branch of chemistry because it's such a complicated string of reactions.
You mentioned that there's an economic reason why large brewers don't do this, both in terms of time and resources.
Yeah, I also mentioned that if you did do it, you could get 2% more extract out of your ingredients.
But that wouldn't necessarily balance out.
It may not balance out the effort. Yeah.
How many craft brewers, people in a category such as yourselves, do you think do this?
Well, 10 years ago was like maybe 0.1%.
Really?
Yeah. But now, because it's the year of the lager we've been saying for 25 years, which I joke that it's been the year of the lager for 500 years. But that's another story.
We need to work on your definition of year.
Well, 15, 16. So it's 508. Yeah. So I would say that it's had its run for 500 years. But anyways, since lagers are now purportedly becoming the thing, well, I've yet to see that dethrone hazies, but people are having to look under the hood of how to make a good lager. And actually they want to. Brewers want to. Brewers love lagers. Brewers love decocting. I mean, they do and they don't, right? We've talked about the work that goes behind it.
But from an economic standpoint, though, so most craft brewers are going to start off by making the ales because they're only going to be in the fermentation tanks for about a week.
This is true. If
Whereas
you're starting
lagers,
a business,
you're going to be in the fermentation, the lagering. Well, if they have a lagering tank, but you're going to be in the tank for about 6 weeks. So that's 6 weeks or 5 weeks longer that you've got money in the grain and or in the ingredients to get to a profit.
100%.
And so that cash is tied up in a lager for a lot longer. So it's not economically feasible to lager.
And we chose to be a lager brewery
because we're not that smart, but we like to decoct. I guess it.
And there's a spot in the market. There's not anyone doing what we're doing on that side.
Would you decoct an ale?
Again, you asked about 547. Who knows?
Do we decoct any ales?
No. But I will say that the Suderbrow, which I think should have its own episode.
That's like an ale lager, though.
It's an ale.
Yeah, I know.
It's 100% an ale. It's our Hefeweizen.
What I find interesting is so you're going through this, I won't say unnecessary, but optional process.
Yeah.
You probably don't need to do. You never tell anybody about this, right? This isn't a marketing thing
I'm telling them now.
We decoct.
Yeah.
Well,
it also sounds like a dirty word. And so sometimes it just comes off weird. Like, we're decocting today.
Yeah. Like the firkin. People love to substitute that for the F word.
But no, I mean, this sounds like something that you'd say, well, yeah, we do this with our beer. This is some few people do.
Beer nerds get it. Beer nerds would get it.
But we also don't tell the beer nerds either.
Yeah. Well, we are now.
Hey.
If the beer nerds are listening, this is where you tell it. You don't say it in an elevator. You can't say I decoct and just get off the
does
elevator.
become awkward.
Yeah.
Dude, look over someone. Hey, I decoct.
So we need a little bit of time to unpack it. But yeah, we're telling people now, and I think that right here, and there's ways that we can start to roll out the education. I agree with you.
It would be fun to do a side by side, like we really make it a big, come and try.
There are some
Decocted and
very
non-decocted.
respected brewers that will tell you that it matters. There are some very respected brewers that will tell you it doesn't matter. And I think that's some of the romance to all of this is that there may never be an answer to this question because a lot of this is very, very subjective.
So our former brewer, Shane Butner, amazing brewer, he did not believe that it mattered as much as Bobby did and was always very, very frustrated that Bobby was forcing, in particular, not the regular decoction, but the triple decoction. He was like, this is too much.
That triple was a nightmare.
Anyway, but then Charlie Bamforth, the Pope of Foam, the beer chemist that Bobby
We'll get him on this
studied under.
podcast someday.
Anyway, so he came out a couple years back and gave a talk about just lagers in general. And Shane asked him, Charlie, what do you think about decoction? And it was the most beautiful moment because Charlie said, well, it doesn't really matter.
No.
And Shane looked at you.
That's not what Charlie said.
Oh, what did he say?
Charlie said that he made Carling Black Lager, that's the name of it, in England. He was the quality manager.
For Bass.
Before Bass.
No, before Bass.
Point being, he said, we did it in 2 weeks. We did not decoct. We were the number one selling lager in all of England. He says, I'll let you take that for what it's worth.
So then we didn't do it and we still made more beer or made more money.
Yeah. I think, and I went to Charlie after that. He said that. And I said, I get where you're coming from. I think what you're trying to say is that until you can be proven, it's like being proven guilty it's the opposite of what we tend to say. He says, prove it to me that it matters, rather than it saying that it does and prove it to me.
Yeah, but that's
that
like saying
doesn't.
Doritos is the number one selling product, therefore it's a health food.
Yeah, his answer, to be fair, his answer was more nuanced than what I just gave. I'll say that.
All I know is that Shane looked at you and was like, eat it, buddy.
But it did come down to you have to prove it to yourself. You can't brew from the heart when it comes to decoction. You have to prove it. And
wait, no, you have to brewing, decocting is brewing from the heart.
Well,
though.
it is, but from the business,
no one wants to
from
do
the
it.
business side of it, you can't just continue to do it just because it feels right. You have to prove that it makes a better product and that it sells and so on and so on.
I am an ale girl. I love our lagers. I do, but I'm always drinking the cask condition or cask conditioned ales. But there is something to when we did the trial test with the Pirates Cove. Oh, you could get that sweetness. It was lovely. I was a big fan. Decoction for the win.
All right. Well, you don't know anything about decoction. At least you know a little bit now. And that will conclude this episode of Respecting the Beer. Make sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player so you'll never miss an episode. And feel free to join the Facebook group to get updates between the episodes and support the show over on Patreon. Links to both of these can be found in the show notes. And until next time, please remember to respect the beer.